It falls to me to give you a little bit of a potted history of UK Biobank. I was trying to think when the Leeds Assessment Centre was open, but it was probably 7 or 8 years ago, I should say, when we wrote to you and asked you if you'd like to be part of this amazing project, the intention of which is to follow the health of 500,000 people aged 40 to 69 during the recruitment phase, for the next 10, 20, 30 years and perhaps longer. Massive undertaking. Something like this had never quite been done before, certainly not in the numbers, certainly not asking for all the information, the detailed information about your lifestyle, your health, and all the measures that we took, how tall you were, how you measured around the waist, and those sorts of things. So nothing quite like this had ever been undertaken before. No one was quite sure that it would be successful. People thought that it would not be possible to recruit 500,000 people across the country. And yet we pressed on. You can see from the map there were 22 recruitment centres up and down the country. At any one time we were recruiting between 600 and 700 people a day. So it became a bit of an industrial process to some degree in terms of making sure that our systems worked and that those blood samples that we took from you, the urine samples that we took from you, could be taken away, stored, frozen down and used for analyses at a later date. Leeds was our best performing assessment centre. 44,000 people from in and around the Leeds area took part in UK Biobank. So 44,000 people, just like you, came to that building in Leeds City Centre, went through the process, filled in the questionnaires, were weighed, measured, we took blood. I mean, just a massive, an amazing achievement, I think. And I have to say, it was all done, there's my little pointer, somewhere, there you go, on time and within budget. It was a tremendous achievement, and we're really grateful to all those people who came along and said they would help us. Just a brief reminder of what it was that we did. We asked for your permission to follow your health over many years. We asked you lots and lots of questions on that touchscreen questionnaire about where you lived, who you lived with, whether you owned your own home, whether you had a mortgage, questions about your health, questions about your family health, questions about your parents, your birth weight. I mean, just a huge number of questions which we thought would be of interest to scientists at some time in the future, without really knowing what sorts of questions they might be asking. So we're trying to cover as many bases as we could. Later on in the project, as we became more experienced in collecting that data, we took some eye measurements and photos of eyes of a number of participants. We did a hearing test. We measured heart rate and the heart. We undertook some mental health questions, and we asked more about people's diet. And in fact, if you have an email address, and I think it's quite likely that most of you do, you may well have received further emails from us asking you to help yet more. Tell us more about your diet, help us out with cognitive function tests. The most recent one was asking a little bit about the sorts of jobs that you had, particularly in regard to lung health. So lots and lots of information has been collected. It's all enormously useful, or will be enormously useful, for health research in the future. So those blood samples that we took, it was only 3 or 4 tablespoons full. People thought it was a lot more. In part, that is because that the tubes that the blood was collected in had some liquid in it already, because the blood samples would have been stored in different ways so that scientists have the choice in the future of how those blood samples are used. So they store them in different ways to ensure that they can be kept over a long period of time in a variety of different systems. This, I don't really need the pointer here. This is the freezer in Manchester. If ever you land at Manchester Airport, about a minute before landing, if you're on the left-hand side, you look out the window, you'll see 2 huge great nitrogen tanks outside a big flat building. That is UK Biobank. The nitrogen tanks, the biggest nitrogen tanks in the country, feed this system here, which is a robotic storage system The robot, which is about twice the height of an individual, moves up and down this track and operates at -20. So if you have to service it, you're going to need a cup of cocoa afterwards, at the very least. People do go in there and service these things. But the robot opens these drawers on the left and right and randomly places your samples of blood and urine at -80. And altogether, because each of those tubes of blood that we took is subdivided into a smaller tube, we have 15 million tubes stored in this system. Obviously, the crucial thing is we need to find those. We need to retrieve those samples of blood and urine in the future when we need to. And so they're all barcoded individually in such a way that we can go back and find a sample of blood or urine. And what that might mean is if in 10 years' time, scientists are investigating, let's say, prostate cancer, and they're looking for 1,000 people who haven't developed 1,000 men who haven't developed prostate cancer and 1,000 men who have, and they're interested in what the blood might tell them, what so the genetics might tell them, we can identify those individuals, and then we can go back into this store and find those blood samples, pick them out and send them away for analysis. Enormously high tech. It couldn't possibly be done without the sort of IT equipment that's, is basically leading edge systems to connect to this sort of system to allow us to store and retrieve samples and do that securely. So there's the individual information about you, your name, your address, isn't identified, won't be identified, and isn't provided to scientists, with the information that we send them for their analyses. Now, I have to just do something here. It takes a bit of time to warm up, but you may remember this. He's talking about spirometry, the breath test.
Do a test known as spirometry, which is measuring the capacity of the lungs and how forcibly you can exhale the air from the lungs.
Who remembers this? Come on. Who remembers this?
Feet flat on the floor. And sat up straight. Following the deep breath.
I think he's going to show us.
Lips around the tube.
Here we go.
You're going to blow down it with as much force as possible.
Come on. Keep going. Do you remember doing that? Yes, I think we all do. Yeah. So that was one of the measures that we took, was that horrid thing of blowing into that tube and being told to keep going until you feel like your lungs are going to come out and you've had enough. Well, just as an example, that information has already been used in one study. It will be used in lots of studies, but it's been used in one study, which is already reported, and it's looked at the best 50,000 lung functions out of all of the biobank participants, and the worst. And it's also looked at smoking, and it's tried to find out why some people who smoke still have good lungs, and some people who don't smoke have bad lungs. And it's come up with some very useful and interesting findings. And it's just a fantastic example of the way that UK Biobank will be used to find out why some people get ill and why some people don't. Why do some people respond well to therapy and some people don't? Why is it that chemotherapy works for some cancer patients and it doesn't for others? And can we develop new systems that, let's say, would allow us to identify patients who will benefit very well with one treatment but not with the other? So it's about personalising medicine. And you can see that the story based on the lung function made all the press. You may have read about it yourselves. This was a piece that was in BBC News, trying to explain to people why it is that this resource has been so useful. So there's a number of ways that the information or the samples that you gave us are being used. Perhaps most excitingly and most interestingly is genotyping. So we've gone away and looked at the genetics of all the samples. Not because we want to do studies, but we figure other scientists may, and it's cheaper for us to do this gene analysis ourselves rather than ask scientists to do 50,000 here or 20,000 there. So we've done this, and this resource is now available to scientists. And we have looked at 800,000 little points on the genome which are known to be involved in disease. And we've identified those on these 500,000 anonymous samples, your samples. And that information is already playing its part in health research. There's some other new way of looking at genes. I mean, this whole area just advances rapidly every time you look at it, which means that from the 80,000 parcels that we've looked at, you can guess what the rest of the genome looks like. And that is allowing scientists to look at another 70 million little snips on the genome, all of which will be helpful in trying to identify why it is some of us might get a particular disease and other people won't. We have also done some what we call blood-based measures. That's looking at things like hormone levels, cholesterol, high cholesterol, low cholesterol, sort of thing that's interesting to scientists looking at heart disease. Vitamin D, we hear lots about vitamin D these days, calcium, glucose, lots of other things which are in our bodies all the time, racing around in our bloodstreams, which may be of interest to scientists in the future. And we're going to look at the sorts of infections that people may have had. There'll be little markers left in our blood from the infections that we've picked up over the years. Tremendous interest in whether infections are related to things like cancer. Some blood cancers, for instance, are believed to be related to certain infections, so it would be useful for scientists, doing those sorts of studies. We've also, I said this is a potted history, I know that I'm kind of speaking at length, but there is so much to say, and I'd urge you to look at the website if you really want to know a lot more. But some of you may have worn our activity monitor, our little wrist-worn monitor for a week. Has anybody here received? Worn a hands up? Yeah, lots of you. So that's reassuring to know. We 100,000 participants have worn those things. 1 in 5 people, 1 in 5 of our participants who we asked to wear have worn it, which is no mean achievement in itself, and I think says a lot about the people who joined UK Biobank. That data is already being crunched. People are looking at it. This particular, let's just go back. You can see this is some data from someone, their day actually. So they're asleep here, they're jogging to work, so it's not me. That's the working day, and goodness me, they're jogging on the way home again. And then this is their evening activity. So a lot of information, particularly interested to scientists who are interested in sleep, and people who don't sleep very well, people who get up in the night, people who sleep during the day rather than the evening, and that can be linked to illnesses like depression. So a lot of data can be gained from these simple sorts of things. All GPs, all participants are registered with their GPs. UK Biobank was able to write to you because you were registered with the GP practice, and the NHS was supportive of what it was we were doing. This will provide information about the sorts of reasons that take us to the GP, migraine, worried about our hearts, a wide variety of illnesses that may not have been reported when you joined the project, but which you've since developed, or which we have since developed. I'm a participant too. So this is crucial to the long-term follow-up for UK Biobank. Obviously, the NHS provides the majority of healthcare in the UK, and so it's absolutely crucial that once again, in an anonymous sort of way, we can link to these data sets, these databases, this information, and provide it without identifying participants to scientists. There are lots of questions about what is GP data. And one thing going through our mind at the moment is, could we ask for tumour samples? If we know the participants have had a cancer, do participants think that GP data is tumour sample data? How would they feel about us accessing this sort of data? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wonder, general show of hands, do people think that tumour data, tumour sample collected at a biopsy is the sort of thing that UK Biobank ought to have access to? people feel confident. It's a question that's, you know, being discussed at the moment about whether that's the sort of thing that we should do. We're starting to scan people. Anybody here had an invite to be imaged? 1, 2, 3. Did you go? Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you very much. This is the next big project. It's a long way away. It's in Manchester. Is that a long way away? Perhaps not too far. However, we understand it's a long way. We would set up a centre in Leeds, but these machines cost £2 million. It's just not possible to put a centre where we recruited participants. But you will receive an invite, and a colleague of mine is going to be talking about that to you a bit later. Now, my last slide is just about how is the resource being used. Well, more than 2,000 scientists across the world have now registered to use UK Biobank. I think it's a lot more. They have to show to us that they're bona fide scientists. They have to have a project that is in the public good. And then they can have access to the data and the samples, as they require. A lot of scientists from the UK, and you're going to hear from some eminent scientists in Leeds who are already using the resource, but also scientists from right around the world. And in due course, we would hope to see many, many more spots on that particular slide. The fact is, although UK Biobank has been going for 10 years, it's still very early days for the sort of study that it is. We're a prospective study, so it takes time to collect information about health, about the sorts of illnesses that we get, about those of us who stay healthy. And only then can that data be used, and then can that information be used for health research. So that is just a potted history. I'm going to take a few questions, but before I do that, I'm going to tell you that in a few moments we'll be talking, we'll hear from Professor Jenny Bout and Dr. Sarah McKee about some work that they're doing at Leeds University involving UK Biobank data. So they've applied to use the resource, and they've had that data approved, and they're now doing some research. I'm delighted to see Dr. Susan Wallace is here from the UK Biobank Ethics and Governance Council. Now, that is a body that is independent of UK Biobank, but that was established by our funders to ensure that we carried out the project in an appropriate manner, in a responsible manner. And I suppose, to an extent, they're there to protect participants. They describe themselves as a critical friend of UK Biobank, which I think is a function that they fulfil. But we have Susan Wallace here from the EGC just to talk a bit about their role and the sort of input that they've had within the resource. Then we'll be hearing from Martin McKibbin, he's from Leeds Teaching Hospital, who's using data from UK Biobank resource to do his work. Then my colleague Kirsty Lomas will talk very briefly about the imaging study that we hope some of you have been involved with, and we hope that others of you may be minded to take part in. And then if we've got time, we'll have some discussion at the end. If things roll on, and often they do a bit, we're happy, those of us who are about to take questions, hang around at the end and talk to you. For as long as it takes, or you can email us, visit the website or whatever. So, with no further ado, I think we will move